NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said the alliance is not seeking a new Cold War with Russia on its 70th anniversary. But he called for greater efforts at deterrence and called for more members to increase spending on defence. He was addressing a joint meeting of both chambers of the US Congress. Here's some of what he had to say.
At the entrance to the NATO headquarters in Belgium, there are two monuments. One, a piece of the Berlin Wall, designed to keep people in and ideas out. It failed. The other monument is a twisted steel beam from the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A memorial to the ordinary people going about their business on an ordinary day when the unthinkable happened. A memorial to the 2,977 people who lost their lives on 9/11. A reminder of how all NATO allies stood with the United States in its hour of need.
Let's take a closer look at that speech with Marco Overhaus. He's an analyst of transatlantic affairs from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs here in Berlin. And we're also joined from Washington by our correspondent there, Oliver Salet, who is outside the US Congress. Welcome to you both. Let's start with you, Marco. So we saw Jens Stoltenberg evoking key moments in shared European and defence history. What was his main message today?
Well, his main message, there were several messages. I think one important message was that not only does Europe need the United States and the NATO alliance, but the other way around, that the United States benefits greatly from the NATO alliance by providing Washington with 29 or 28 allies, and that from the US perspective, investment in NATO is a good investment, and that NATO will, address the issue of fairness and burden sharing, which I think is a key word that a lot of people, not only President Trump, but a lot of people in Washington really want to hear. So I would say that these are among his most important messages.
Oliver Salet in Washington. Jens Stoltenberg received a very warm welcome from both chambers of Congress. The president has been quite anti-NATO over the last year or so. What should we draw from that, if anything?
Well, the signal coming here from Congress today is a signal of unity, and you've just mentioned these long applauses that took minutes, and it was really a strong signal 70 years after NATO was founded that the alliance is strong. Stoltenberg repeatedly stressed that. He also talked about the historical importance, about the achievements, that it's the most successful military alliance in history, and that was very much celebrated here at Congress today. But at the same time, of course, he also outlined the threats that are exposed to NATO, external threats such as the strengthening Russia and with aggressive foreign policies, as well as internal threats that he tackled indirectly when he spoke about that several democratic countries are actually involved in NATO, and that the different difficulties and opinions are actually rather a strength than weakness.
All right. Let's hear another part of Jens Stoltenberg's address. Here he is talking about the challenges facing the alliance.
We face unprecedented challenges no one nation can face alone. The global balance of power is shifting. The fight against terrorism is a generational fight. We have only just seen the beginning of the threats in cyberspace. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and big data could change the nature of a conflict more fundamentally than the Industrial Revolution. And we will need to continue to deal with a more assertive Russia.
So, Marco Overhaus from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, quite a list there. Russia to one side. We're looking at NATO facing a different set of priorities in a different world.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a challenge. And the big challenge is that each member state, each of the 29 member states, views different threats with a different priority. And I think in one respect, I would not agree with what Stoltenberg said during his speech. He said, you know, we always had our divisions and our discussions. That's true. But I think the real issue is that both the fact, you know, that we have many more members in NATO than we used to have, you know, decades ago. So there's more scope for division. And also the kinds of division are deeper, I think, than they used to be. And finally, there isn't this unifying threat anymore that we think there was during the Cold War. So yes, we have divisions, we have debates, but they are more severe, I would argue, than Mr. Stoltenberg in his speech before Congress would admit.
Just for example, you talked about the divisions being deeper now. For example?
Well, there's a lot of issues. One issue is how do we deal with arms control agreements? You know, the INF treaty, treaty prohibiting intermediate range missiles was mentioned by Mr. Stoltenberg as one topic. And I think there will be a severe debate. You know, how will we deal with the end of this treaty? How will we deal with a landscape where the INF treaty is not existing anymore? What will be the measures to be taken? I think that will be one of the topics where there is a lot of divisive potential in the NATO alliance, and there are others more.
Oliver Sallet, President Trump has overseen increases in US defence spending. Is NATO still a priority, or is it looking elsewhere, to China and the Pacific, perhaps?
Well, we've heard a lot of critical remarks over the last years on NATO by the US president. We all remember the famous words that NATO's obsolete. He said that at a NATO summit 2 years ago. He then later called Germany a Russian captive. So there were a lot of doubts about how President Trump thinks about NATO, if he thinks NATO is still an important alliance. Now, what we heard today here in Congress was the complete opposite. That was both chambers of Congress uniting and standing, you know, really behind the military alliance NATO. And that's in particular interesting because they're both controlled by different parties. And one, the Democratic Party, which is the House of Representatives, and the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. And as we know, both parties are very much divided right now, but they were able to unite behind this very important issue behind NATO. So that is sending out a strong signal that the United States is backing NATO. It also sends a signal to the US president that he might be in control of one branch of government, the executive power, but not of everything.
And on a point of fact, Oliver, when Jens Stoltenberg addressed both houses, we saw the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and Vice President Mike Pence. No President Trump. Should we read anything into that, or was he just not invited because this is not his jurisdiction?
Well, in the last years, it was always these kind of events were always held at the level of state and heads of state and government. This time around, there are only foreign ministers, and it does seem like, if you look at the last years, and if you remember the critical remarks and the outrage that was sparked by Trump's critical remarks, that right now it was very important for the NATO alliance to have some sort of like more supportive tones and sounds coming from Washington. And that, for one reason, certainly is an answer to the question why we only see foreign ministers here. And for another reason, why Congress is uniting with both chambers behind the alliance.
Just talk about those warm words. We have now. We've had the president. We've had President Trump saying Europeans must pay more. We've had the Europe saying, yes, you make a very good point, Mr. President. Now we have the Secretary General saying, echoing the president's words. Do we expect action to follow? Do we expect European countries now to actually up their spending, or will they just go and say, yes, that's very interesting, and then go back to what they were doing before?
Well, we are already in the process that most European countries, including Germany, are actually spending more. But just one remark which I find really important with regard to what's going on in Washington. It's absolutely true that NATO has a strong, print with Congress that there is a strong bipartisan support for Congress, for NATO in Congress. But in the end, I think what really matters, especially in the event of a crisis, is or are the actions and the deeds of the US president. Congressional support for NATO notwithstanding, what matters in the end is what President Trump does. And as we know, he will at least be around until 2021, possibly even until 2025. So yeah, we should not, given the warm welcome that Stoltenberg has received, we shouldn't be, forget that President Trump is still extremely pessimistic on the NATO alliance. Yeah.
Marco Overhaus from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, thank you so much. And Oliver Sallet in Washington, thank you as well.